Today we have the opportunity to interview the Chief Constable Jim Chu of the Vancouver Police Department, who will be sharing with us his journey of 36-year career with Vancouver Police.
In the 1960s, there were fewer people from other countries here in Canada. So when I grew up, and like a lot of other immigrant kids from other cultures, we all spoke English. We played football, road hockey, baseball at the playground, and did a lot of things that the Canadian kids did in those days. Something that I remember well is that my friends that were Chinese, even though they generally spoke Cantonese or other dialects like Toisan, because they were from different parts of China, they never spoke it among themselves. We would always speak English to each other, but then we would go home and speak Chinese to our parents. Well, definitely there's more people from other parts of the world in Vancouver. And right now, I know there's parts of Vancouver where you can, make out quite fine and do well without having to speak English, and that's a good thing. So I do see that as changing in the city. But in the future, I think everybody that comes here should try to embrace a little bit more of the Canadian values and Canadian culture. When I was young, I saw the police officers that came to my school, and they would talk to us about how to cross the street, how to look both ways, and I really admired and respected those police officers. Then when I got a little older, I was a school safety patrol volunteer, which means the grade 6 and grade 7 students, they would be at a busy corner and help the kids cross the street. And so I got to know police officers then as well. And so as I grew up, I had a good deal of admiration, respect for police officers, and I thought, hey, I'd like to do that one day. So I was going to Simon Fraser University in 1979, and it was a really cold, wintry day. The studies were, very tedious. And on the radio was the chief of the Vancouver Police Department saying, answering lots of questions. And then somebody phoned up and said, how do you apply to be a police officer? And he says, just come down to 312 Main and put your application in. So I turned my car around, skipped school that day, went to the police station, put my application in, and then I got hired 3 months later. The interesting thing about being in policing is you could have 5 or 6 jobs in one career. So everybody starts out working in patrol, and I can remember walking in the downtown east side in the early 1980s and how difficult an area that was to police, but always very interesting. And when I got promoted, I was a detective for a while, and I worked in the robbery squad, so I had a lot of high-profile cases, including some jewelry store robberies, cases where people got hurt quite badly, and it's really rewarding to be able to solve cases like that. And another case involved a theft from a very prominent Vancouver charity, very unusual suspect, and I remember getting enough evidence to charge that person and have him convicted in court. Also, I served as a patrol sergeant for 5 years. So you're not only going to 911 calls out in the streets of Vancouver, but you're also supervising others. And that taught me a lot about leading other people. Well, one of the challenges was trying to learn the job of policing, because it's very complicated and it has many complexities. Certainly being a visible minority police officer, that was unusual in Vancouver, especially in the early 80s or late 1970s. I'll give you one example of a challenge. I can remember going to a lot of calls in the Chinatown area and everybody trying to speak Chinese to me. And of course it was Cantonese or Toisan. I could not understand it. And so I would have to explain to people, no, I don't speak Chinese. It's very rare to run into somebody that speaks Shanghainese. But here's one frustration I had. One of the Caucasian officers on my squad used to be a Hong Kong policeman. So the Caucasian officer spoke way better Chinese than I did. And so we'd be at calls together and people would be talking to the white guy. When I joined the police department, I always wanted to prove myself and show that I could do the job, that I was not hired just because I'm a visible minority. As police chief, I really wanted to, again, show that I have a knowledge of the city, I have a knowledge of policing methods, and I could be a leader for this organization, but also a community builder. And I really think that I had a good run of 8 years as police chief, but it is time to move on and let somebody else take the reins of this organization. Well, I grew up speaking Jianghanese to my mother, but my father, he spoke English, so the two of us spoke English all the time. But we grew up with the usual Chinese festivities and events. For example, Chinese New Year's. It was really impressed to me always to honor the parents and the elders in our community. And the best appreciation I had is for Chinese food. So I loved Chinese food. And then I married a police officer. She's Caucasian. Her first efforts to cook Chinese food were very, very bad. And so I have to go out on my own and eat Chinese food because I like it. And of course, Chinese New Year's, as I mentioned, is an important event for my kids and my sisters and brothers as well. Well, in Vancouver in the 1970s, there was much more of a need to assimilate, to be part of the Canadian culture in terms of entertainment, sports, and knowledge. Whereas I think today, because there's more immigrants, you don't really have to get into the Canadian realm as quickly or as much as you need to. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's different times when you're sort of like one of the few Chinese people in the class. Everybody just talks English to each other, and you can become Canadian quicker. That's one thing that can happen. I think there's definitely so many volunteer opportunities, and a lot of those opportunities are not in traditional areas where, say, Chinese people might want to be interested in. And to give you one example for myself, I volunteered as a library trustee with a library board. Did that for 8 years. Very good experience for knowing and learning about leadership and strategic management, a lot about the political process. So that was a lifelong learning opportunity that gave me insights that I wouldn't have gotten out of a book or out of a course. And that's what you can get out of volunteering. So I encourage young people to volunteer and develop those leadership skills. I think we need to always celebrate everybody else's ethnic backgrounds and cultures. I think we do a great job of that in Vancouver. I look forward to the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the Chinatown New Year's Parade, the Vaisakhi Parade, which is coming up in April, the Pride Parade, which is celebrating other people's lifestyles. I think we all have to not only embrace being Canadians, but also embrace the parts of the world that others are from. One thing I'll say is that every time since I've owned a house, I always put a Canadian flag up on Canada Day. And so I encourage people from the Chinese community or all communities, it would be not expensive to buy a flag, put it up. I think your neighbors will really appreciate it. Well, I'm going to take some time off. I've been working as a police officer since I was 19 years old. So finished high school, right to university, then as a police officer full-time for 36 years. My wife is a retired police officer, so she's happy I'm going to retire and we'll take a little bit of time off. And then we'll see what the future holds. I've had some offers for public life and private life, and I'll make my decision on what works at that time. This is the best city in the world. And having traveled some other major cities and in Europe, in North America, or in Asia, I keep coming back to what a great city Vancouver is. It's not only beautiful, but the people are great here. And when I talk about those parades and other festivities and how we celebrate things, just this last weekend I was walking along Falls Creek and I ran into the Cherry Blossom Festival celebration. So that has a lot of basis on the Japanese culture, because the cherry blossom trees were imported from Japan. I thought, wow, isn't this great that we're just celebrating this culture at that time? So it's great to be part of Vancouver, and I think a lot of people elsewhere in Canada envy us, especially in the wintertime.